Good morning. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Virginia Transit Association's webinar, Winning Transit Projects in HB2, now known as Smart Scale. I'm Lisa Guthrie, Executive Director of the Virginia Transit Association and the moderator for today. And we're recording this webinar, and it will be available on our website along with the slides for on-demand viewing later. And I just want to add that we are experiencing slow internet speeds in our office, so please be patient if it takes a moment to switch from slide to slide. So we encourage you to send in your questions anytime during the presentations, and here's how to do that. Look for the webinar panel on your screen and simply type your question into the question box. And we will answer them at the end of the webinar, but you can submit your question at any time and we'll hold on to it until later. Remember that the audience is muted, so we won't be able to hear you during the webinar. So we have some very important presentations today, providing you with a great deal of valuable information about transit applications through Smart Scale, formerly known as HB2. We're going to start with Ronique Day. Ronique is a policy analyst in the offices of the Virginia Secretary of Transportation, Aubrey Lane. She's the right hand to two deputy secretaries and has a variety of responsibilities within the office. Prior to her appointment, Ronique worked with the Virginia Department of Transportation as a procurement policy analyst to the Director of the Administrative Services Division, the business unit responsible for all non-construction related procurements. She completed extensive research in advance of Smart Scale being signed into law and was part of the executive oversight team. Ronique holds a bachelor's degree in paralegal studies from the University of Richmond and a master's in business from Virginia Commonwealth University. Welcome, Ronique.
Good morning, and thank you so much. So, Jamie, I think you're going to have to advance the slides. Thank you so much, and I'll just say next slide when I'm ready. Thank you. Thanks for your patience, everybody. So just to bring everybody up to speed and get you in the mindset of Smart Scale, and bear with me because I'm still learning how to use Smart Scale instead of HB2. But as you're aware, HB2 is legislation that was championed by Governor McAuliffe and the Republican Speaker of the House in the 2014 General Assembly. This legislation did pass unanimously, and it requires the CTB to use objective and quantifiable process for allocation of construction funds. And of course, HB2 is based off of 6 factors. The Commonwealth Transportation Board does allocate the funds, and the funds is for programming as well as capacity enhancing projects. And that programming goes into the 6-year improvement program. The intent of the legislation is for CTB to select the highest ranking projects. And initially when the legislation was passed, there was a lot of discussion as to if the CTB is required to go in order of those rankings. And as you all may know, that is not a requirement for them to follow the rankings. However, if they choose to move a project out of its ranking, they do have to explain why they chose to do so. The policy for Smart Scale was developed over a 16-month period and then adopted by CTB in June of last year. Next slide. So who can submit? As far as transit agencies go, they can submit both on the corridors of statewide significance and regional networks as long as there's a resolution or support from the relevant entity for that project. Within an urban development area, there is not a submission process that's in place presently for public transit agencies. Okay, so the speed is a little bit slow, and I think it advanced me. It skipped over a slide, so I'll just talk to that slide. This round of HB2, we received over 300 applications, a total of 321. 131 entities submitted at least one application. 287 projects were screened for scoring. And specific to transit, 19 projects total were transit or included a transit component. In total, almost $740 million of transit investment. $262 million was requested, including leveraging other funds. And 16 of the 19 transit or transit-related projects were selected for funding. So that's a really good statistic to show you how well transit projects fare. And the total number of funding and the total number of projects submitted, there was 56.8% or close to 57% of the total projects that were submitted that were actually able to be funded. So eligibility. The types of projects that are eligible, and again, the site is skipped over a couple of slides, guys, so I'm going to try to talk through and catch up to where it's at. The standalone studies are not eligible for funding. Projects must be included in the relevant constrained long-range plan. NEPA does not have to be complete. We are expecting to see a preferred alternative decision on projects, major construction projects, or any other projects that are submitted. And there should be some type of level of readiness, because when it goes through the screening and scoring process, those who are working through that scoring need to have enough information to be able to go ahead and evaluate that project. And I also neglected to let you all know or speak to operations and maintenance. Any projects that are related to operations and maintenance are not eligible for smart scale funds. Addition, if it's just a structure on a lot, things like that would not be covered. And the reason being is that it doesn't increase the capacity in any way. All right, and bear with me, you all. I'm catching up with slides. Okay, in addition to eligibility and the types of projects, projects must also meet a need in VTrans. So we touched on this a little bit earlier. It has to be on a corridor of statewide significance or within a regional network. But specifically to transit, if it's an urban development area, it would not be screened in. And we also need to make sure that any type of project that you're submitting for consideration is expanding capacity in some way. Okay, now I'm caught up. So this screen right here, which I know has been up for a while, really is just going through examples of what is eligible under bus transit, rail transit, and freight rail. A piece that is missing on this slide is TDM, Transportation Demand Management projects, are as well included in eligible. New and expanded service, and you're talking about van pool or on-demand transit service. We're also looking at improved park and ride lots or new park and ride services.
Okay, are you ready for the next slide? I'm not sure we are controlling that.
Yeah,
okay.
I've clicked next slide, but nothing has happened, Lisa.
All right, there we are.
There we go. Okay. All right, so this is a summary of transit projects that were submitted for the first round, and this is specific to transit. This does not include any TDM, park and ride, anything like that. So 14 projects in total were submitted. 7 were successful. 2 were scored and not funded. 4 total were screened out because they weren't eligible, and then 1 was moved at the grantee request. There was 1 TDM project that was submitted, and it was only 1, and that one that was submitted was selected and funded. And just to give you some examples of projects that were screened out, if it was simply a technology upgrade, or if there was some changes to a facility that was not going to expand service, or operating assistance, those are examples or types of projects that would not be included or screened in or eligible for funding. First round submission and successful projects. This goes through a list of the projects that were successful and are funded. And you will notice that one TDM project at the bottom is at 66, and it's an Arlington County project that was submitted for consideration. One thing that I will note here is that we did not receive any freight rail projects for consideration. So where does transit score well? And this next slide hopefully will, there we go, catch up with me. So some of the areas that transit scores well is access to jobs for disadvantaged population groups, transportation and efficient land use, and rail transit as far as economic development. So, one of the key things to take away here is that you have to keep in mind that when the scoring occurs, it is relative to other projects. So you may find that the project that you're proposing does really, really well in one area, such as accessibility, but in safety, but in economic development, it may not do that well, or another area that's being contemplated for scoring. And because you are taking each of the factors to come up with the total score, and that is also relative to other projects as well as the cost, that scoring may or may not change. It may or may not move you up the list, but this is an example of areas specifically that we found where transit did do very well. So this just gives a first round funding summary. In total, there was a request of close to $7 billion of smart scale funds. The board adopted 1.7, and it is a fully constrained project. So each of the projects are funded completely through the 3 phases of engineering, or 3 phases, however you presented that project. 163 projects were selected. On average, the request was $9.8 million, and there was a total of $833 million in both the statewide priority or high priority pot as well as the district grant program. This is a breakdown of the transit summary submission and what was funded versus what would not. And you would see here again, using the data that we received in the projects, transit does very well. So projects with the transit component, 84.2% of those were funded. And then projects that have a bus, rail, transit as a principal improvement, 80% of those were funded. So very, very well. So just to talk a little bit about the programming cycle, the funds are awarded on a biannual basis moving forward. So then after this second round, SmartScale will not open up again until 2018. This call for projects that will be opening right around the corner is for the outer years of the 6-year program. We'll go through the project selection process and screening just like we did before. We'll evaluate the results, evaluate the project, and release the results in January. And then the board will thereafter develop the program. Now the next map, once it comes up, really is just to give you a snapshot of the project applications that we receive. And you can see it's very diverse. There's not one area or another that did or did not submit projects. However, you can see that there are some areas that you don't see a number of dots, and it could be that needs that exist for that area are more important along a certain corridor versus other areas of the state. So recommended changes for round 2. There are some other suggestions to factor areas, the use of the online tool and policy that are going to be considered by the board at the end of this month at their next meeting. So I would encourage everyone, if you are not able to attend CTB, to live stream it. If you go to the CTB's website, each of those meetings are live streamed. But just to share a little bit of what you'll see and what you'll find that's happening and what will be before the board for consideration. There will be an updated online web portal that we expect will be more user-friendly. You'll be able to receive alerts and also communicate back with teams that are evaluating your projects. The next thing that you'll notice is that we'll be requiring documentation of matching funds moving forward. So if you're leveraging outside funds, you need to make sure that you've already applied for it and that there is some documentation to support it, or some type of validity to the leveraged money, because obviously that impacts the overall cost of the project and how each of the projects are scored and ranked. Now, with regard to cost estimate increases, if your project estimate goes up either after advertisement or at award and it exceeds the threshold that's within the policy guide, there are, as a result, two things that could occur. And when that is specific to the benefit cost evaluation that's done. So if the revised benefits or cost is higher than the lowest scoring funded district project, then it moves forward. If it's higher, then the funds will be allocated unless the CTB takes action to retain funding on the project to address the shortfall. I'm sorry, lower. During the next couple of weeks, and everyone should have received an email, and if not, I'll touch on that later on. But there is a webinar that will present some of these changes and go into more detail about what to expect. And again, CTB will have to consider this and adopt it into the policy. The next thing we call the transit chicken and egg problem, and Terry Brown will be able to talk a little bit more to this. But at the end of the day, the takeaway is that we'll do an analysis of a full corridor improvement. If you're presenting a project, and in this example, it was related to the Leland Road, I believe, project, where there was some expansion that was considered, but also the platforms needed to be extended, and one can't happen without the other. And so because of that, that impacted the ability for the project to be scored very well. So on the next round, what will happen is if there's an issue like this where one thing can't happen with the other and they have to be married together in order to get the best benefit, there'll be an analysis of the full corridor improvement. And as I mentioned, Terry can speak a little bit more to that. So the biannual cycle, you all probably have seen this before. Some of the key dates, or one of the most important dates here, is to remember that September 30th is the last day that you can submit projects. What we found during the first cycle, once it opened up, was that the last 2 weeks, everyone's trying to get all of their information together and have everything submitted, and so we saw a significant uptick in project submissions over that amount of time. And in order for you to be able to receive technical assistance that's needed, I want to try to plan ahead as much as you can to begin the conversations, begin your projects, so that you can get it in so that it can be evaluated and submitted before September 30. So the schedule and next steps, just want to hit on some of the key dates to take away from this. July 28th, the CTB approves the resolution and revisions to the policy. July 29th, there's web training and outreach for round 2. So hopefully you all did receive an email about this, and if you did not, please reach out to Terry Brown directly or go to the website, which will give you some details about that. August 15th, which you'll notice here is highlighted in red, that's the deadline to submit your notice of intent to apply in order to guarantee technical assistance to help pull together your projects. I will also say that at the Smart Scale website, there is currently a YouTube video that goes to the webinar that happened already, which was in June. The second one is in July, and there is a makeup one as well. So if you do want to go ahead and be a little bit early and looking at it, if you missed the first one, there's an opportunity there for you to go ahead and look at it. And if you have questions, you can certainly go ahead and move those questions forward. So key takeaways for round 2, apply, apply, apply. Obviously, this was a quick snapshot of what round 1 looked like. but walking away from it and going into round two, transit projects fare very, very well. The funding of those projects is up at 80% or just a little bit above. So the likelihood that a project will get funded based on those statistics is good. Overall, transit does very, very well due to the relatively low cost. Always just keep in mind that HB2 requires that benefits produced by a project are analyzed and are relative on the basis of other projects as well as other relative costs. The results that are going to be provided to CTB, which we did first round and will continue unless for some reason CTB decides they don't need it, will base a project on relative cost, specific to HB2 cost, and then also relative to the total cost of those projects. Rental transit also has great benefits, however, is very, very costly to construct, so that may also impact the overall scoring. Just be mindful that if you are bringing leverage funds to the table this go round, there will need to be some type of documentation to support those funds. And look for opportunities to marry up transit improvements with a road improvement, because we also found that in instances where there was a component of it that was transit related, those projects did score very well. So with that, Lisa, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Okay, Renique, this is
Yes.
Lisa. We did have a couple of questions if you've got another minute or so, because since we know you have to hop off, just some simple questions if you've got a moment to respond to those, okay?
Okay.
One is the question about the map on the slide with the map with the circles. I think it's slide 17. Someone wants to know what the colors indicate, what the colors of the circles, what they mean. That must not have been evident on the slide.
Yes, it's an interactive map. So if you go to the SmartScale website, it will give you an explanation of all of those. But if you look at different weighting scenarios, different types of project submissions, it should give you a breakdown of all of that description for those maps. For those colors on the map. Okay.
All right. Another question, just to reiterate, this biennial process means that after this round 2 is closed at the end of September, there won't be another application period for 2 years, correct?
Correct. We're going to be going to an every 2-year cycle.
Okay. And finally, the questions that came in, a question about the reduced funding down from 1.7 to 800 million, and that's just a statement about what available funding is there, correct?
Okay, so within the slides that I presented, I did not provide a amount that's available for this round because at this point I don't have that information to give. We do, however, know it's going to be reduced.
Okay.
That number is still a to be determined.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much.
You're very welcome. And if there's anything else, certainly, Lisa, feel free to ask folks to email me, but I think Terry can definitely help.
Okay. Thank you. All right.
Thank you.
We'll move forward to Josh Baker, our next presenter. Josh Baker is the General Manager of the Greater Lynchburg Transit Company in Lynchburg. Josh has over 16 years of experience in operations, maintenance, and management of transit in Virginia. And prior to joining GLTC in January of last year, Josh was the General Manager of Radford Transit, a New Start transit system he helped to launch, serving the city of Radford, Radford University, and providing connections to Christiansburg and Blacksburg. For the first round of the HB2 project, Josh works closely with the Regional Transportation Planner in Lynchburg to submit the successful application, which will establish a central business district downtown circulator. Specifically, the application allows GLTC to acquire the capital necessary to start the service. Welcome, Josh.
Thanks, Lisa. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here on this presentation today. Hopefully, it will be something that will be helpful for you as you think about the future opportunities for your systems in this in the HB2 funding program. I've only got a few minutes on the call today, but I wanted to just kind of paint the picture of what we've got going on here in Lynchburg, so that as you're out there thinking about projects that you might want to submit, you can kind of understand how we got to the project we did, and then ultimately what the factors were that we evaluated and worked with DRPT and others to make sure that it scored well. So if you want to go to the first slide for me, that'd be great. About 15 years ago, GLTC had a sort of a trolley service in our downtown district. Lynchburg is a very old city in Virginia, and as many other cities are out there that have the same issue, we had a lot of issues with loss of industry, businesses, and ultimately the downtown area of the city became very blighted and poorly used over the course of, I would say, back in the 80s, early 90s. Recently, Lynchburg, as many other areas, has experienced significant increase in our population. Businesses are returning to the area. The downtown district is becoming desirable, and there's been a lot of investment in it. So as a part of this, GLTC spent time talking with many of our local organizations that deal with our businesses in our downtown area, including the city, to sort of talk about what might there be as far as a need out there. And so our project was to establish this central business district circulator to come along with the regrowth, rebirth of our downtown corridor. It does exist on a corridor of statewide significance. One of the things that's very important in this program is that you establish that first and foremost. But this background work that we did, and many of you out there probably have projects that you've been have been sitting off to the side, or maybe there's been some background work, or there's been discussion or surveys or concepts out there that it just hasn't moved forward. That was the case with this one, and so this made a great opportunity for us to apply for the funding. We did, as Lisa summarized, the project is to follow this survey of the downtown and our MPO to acquire the additional bus that is necessary to provide this service. So this is for a bus. It's not for operating funds. It's for the bus and all of the elements of the capital project associated with this. You can go to the next slide for me when you have a chance. The question that you will first face in your application process is how does this project address the VTrans 2040 need? This is all about planning and having a project in line, effectively in the works, that you can identify its impact on your area of significance to the mobility of people, the access to jobs. In our situation, the downtown area is not pedestrian friendly, so this provides access to the employment that people are going to in the downtown area. It addresses issues with parking congestion. It provides mobility for individuals who are otherwise disadvantaged and don't have the ability to move throughout the downtown region. So all of those things came into play, but they ultimately all fell under this VTrans 2040 need. Some components to the project that were particularly important for us and important, I think, for all of the entities that are involved in reviewing this. And let me just pause for a minute and emphasize again, you have multiple people out there that are going to be working with you on this. But the most important one, and the one that you need to get with first and foremost, is DRPT. You've really got to be connected with your grants manager, Terry Brown is on this panel today. Reach out to these people to make sure that you have a discussion before you invest a significant amount of time into this to understand how might this be scored. If it wasn't for Terry, and if it wasn't for the communication and the dialogue and the back and forth and the work to make sure that we understood what did we need to demonstrate and were we demonstrating it and was there additional information or data needed, those are the people that can help you figure that out and really save you a lot of time and headache in trying to pull this together. So make sure that you focus on that first and foremost. But ultimately, make sure you factor in also a lot of visibility with your local planning organizations. Our MPO is a part of an organization called Region 2000. Region 2000 is not reflective of the year 2000, as many people think. It's more reflective of the region, the square miles of the region for which the organization deals with planning support. So our Region 2000 is a significant organization. It houses our Planning District Commission and our MPO. And this is the group that's working on projects related to VDOT, projects related to transit, and everything that goes along with that. When you look at the overall cost of the projects out there, you saw in Ronique's presentation earlier that this is millions and millions of dollars. And so you might scratch your head and say, well, how is my project for a $600,000 transit bus going to be in any way relevant when I'm going up against a VDOT project that's for millions or a rail project that's for millions? Well, it's all about the scoring and the weighting and the scaling of the project. Ultimately, our project really scored well, and Terry will be able to speak better to this than I can, but it scored well in really its cost effectiveness. I mean, relatively, we're purchasing a bus buses are expensive, you all know that, but that one bus will be able to get out there on the road and provide this service very quickly, very effectively, with minimal infrastructure. Sure, you've got signs and you've got advertising and you've got shelters and those kinds of things, but ultimately, when you compare the cost with the impact of people having mobility, the impact of them being able to get to their jobs and dine out when they're working, or if they're otherwise disabled and can't move around the area, all of those things really helped us to score well. And that's what this is about. This session is really to encourage those of you on this call to give thought to some of these projects that might have been sitting off to the side and might have been something that you thought, well, this is something that we really need, but we don't know a way to do this. And partner with these organizations and the people on this call and work through it. I'll wrap up by simply saying that this project for us represents growth and expansion, and that's the other key here. You can't go in here for a state of good repair grant and try to ask for a bus. Oh, thank you. I forgot we had the map. There's a map up on the display for you to sort of show where this is happening in Lynchburg and the downtown area. But this is about service expansion. It's about adding capacity, adding infrastructure, and making sure that you can demonstrate that. Just be careful, because many of us in transit are facing challenges with state of good repair and deferred capital needs and operating issues. That's not what this project's for. So with that said, I wish you all luck. I encourage you to, again, have dialogues with people. If you think it's something that might make sense, feel free to reach out to me. My contact information has been provided to you. I'm happy to talk with you. And ultimately, make sure that you have your relationships and that you have your communication going with your planning organizations and with DRPT. With that said, I will turn it back to Lisa. I did it in my 6 minutes, so I will let you move on in the presentation unless there's questions.
Thank you, Josh. That was really good information and encouragement, because this is a daunting process, and to hear how you were successful and how you were able to move forward with this, I hope will be a good indicator for others that they can have the same level of success. One other thing I'd like to add is that, as you all know, we have a pending capital funding cliff, we're still calling it a cliff, that there is now an advisory board as a result of last session's legislation of 1359, House Bill 1359, and they're going to be looking at the impacts of the loss of bond funding for capital, and they will also be likely asking how many transit systems applied through House Bill 2 or Smart Scale. And we certainly want to maximize our involvement to show that we've got good projects out there and we do need that funding. So another encouragement for you to move forward with this round 2 of the application. So with that, we're going to move forward to hear about another successful application, and that is with Hampton Roads Transit. We're happy to have with us today Keisha Branch. Keisha serves as the Capital Programs and Grants Administration Officer for Hampton Roads Transit. She's worked for the agency since 2002, and in this role, she's responsible for developing capital budgets and securing funding for capital projects and ensuring compliance with federal and state grant regulations. She was responsible for obligating the $318 million for constructing the Tide Light Rail in the city of Norfolk, and is currently working to obligate $19.7 million for the rail vehicles necessary for extending light rail to the city of Virginia Beach. From 1995 to 2002, she held various accounting and grants positions at First Union, Ticor, and Hampton University. We're happy to have you with us, Keisha. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Well, if you could just move to the next slide, I'll start off by sharing what our successful projects were in this first cycle of the Smart Scale, now known as the Smart Scale program. HRT, we submitted 2 projects. One was for our Peninsula Regional Park and Ride lot to enhance them. And over on the Peninsula, we have 2 park and rides. One is the Newport News Transit Center, and one is the Hampton Roads Transit Center. And so one doesn't have any didn't have a park and ride lot at all, and then one we wanted to expand it. So we applied for $3.5 million there, and the other project was for the Regional Commuter Express bus. So for that one, we're asking for 5 transit buses to actually run some expansion services, commuter service, which would be kind of more across a larger area with 2 stops, and that was for $3 million. And if you could change to the next slide. So what I wanted to share today, I think you've got a lot of good information regarding the program and the process from Lynchburg, but I was going to share what our planning process was to participate and ultimately led to our success on this first cycle of the Smart Scale. First thing, the planning director, or my boss, the chief planning director, and myself, we attended all of the VTran meetings and the program workshops. They give a lot of information, and they have a lot of people present who are are experts in this area and can help you to understand areas where you can participate well, or are just different pieces of the program that's critical for you to know, so you'll know what kind of projects you might be able to submit. We also, in another part of the process, we do pull together our leadership or key leadership with our organization, and we review our projects in the CIP. You know, we're responsible each year for updating the transit development plan that goes to the state Department of Rail and Public Transportation. So in that plan, there's a lot of projects that that won't have enough funding. So we're able to look through our CIP and determine projects that you can move funding around. If there's a project that could participate in this program easier than another, you can sometimes shift money. So you pull projects out that may have funding in your plan, but maybe it would not. But it might be a good candidate for this program for Smart Scale. So one strategy is to maybe submit that on this program, and then maybe use some of the funding to fund some other unfunded projects. So that's something that, some of the strategies that you'll work through, that we work through in that process. The other thing we did was we did coordinate with DRPT and the TPO. We got a letter of support from the TPO, and as Josh said before me, those relationships are very helpful. I mean, they have a lot of experience with the program, and they are the scorers of the program, so they have some knowledge and a lot of input they can give, and it saves you a lot of trouble from submitting something you might think would be successful only to have it, screened out. So we did spend time to do that proactively. And then lastly, we worked with the project managers to develop the scope according to the criteria and the cost, because as you saw, if you were to have an overrun, they could reevaluate your project, and it could, be deemed ineligible for the funding. So you want to make sure those costs are accurate. You want to have good schedules, and you're going to need to know the benefits of the project, because there's quite a few scoring criteria, and you really want to make sure that you meet as much of the scoring criteria as you can and do a good job of explaining your project so that it can get the full benefit of meeting those criteria. So you want to, basically, I call it, check in as many boxes as you can. You want to make sure you're able to do that. So that's pretty much, basically our process that we went through in that first cycle, and that's what we're doing in the second cycle. Some of the challenges I'm sure that most transit agencies will have, because we have them as well, is that whenever you're doing expansion services, that the operating is not a component, so it's not an eligible expenditure on this particular program, so it can only be used for capital. So that's always a hurdle, is making sure you have the operating funds to do an expansion service. But we're going through that process again, and hopefully we will be able to find some good candidate projects. And with that said, you can see if there are questions. If no questions, I can turn it back over to Lisa.
Okay, thank you, Keisha. At this point, we don't have any specific questions in, but as we move forward, we just want to remind people that you can submit questions at any time through the software. So thank you very much, Keisha. We're moving on now to hear from Terry Brown. Many of you know Terry, and she is the Public Transportation Programs Administrator for the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation. She's been with DRPT for 9 years, both in finance and in operations. So Terry, welcome. Glad you could join us.
Thank you, Lisa. And I tried to keep it simple, so I just have the one slide, if you can. There you go. Oh, that's not good. There you go. So part of this was to reiterate what Ronique said about Smart Scale. So that's the logo that you'll see from now on. And Scale stands for something. It stands for all of the 6 criteria, and but only if you put 2 E's. So it's actually Scaley. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned a couple of things that may, if they've been mentioned before, then we'll skip them, but and then just back clean up in case there are any questions. So as Keisha mentioned, I don't think that this was necessarily understood by everyone. We've had a couple of people that were surprised by this, but if your scope or your budget changes significantly, and there's a sliding scale for this, your project may have to be rescored. And of course, at that point, you're being rescored with a new pot of money and with a new whole set of projects that are being submitted. And so you don't really, it's a shot in the dark as far as how well your project would do that particular year, that particular funding amount. And along those lines, the scoring is relative. So we have, we have a couple of projects that were highly scored this past year but didn't quite make it. our expectation is that those are going to score pretty well in round 2 just because they're good projects. And so we hope that that will be true, but of course we don't know what's going to come in yet and won't know until after the August 15th cutoff. So when the scores are done, they are relative to everyone else. So it will really depend on what else we get. The good news is that there won't be an I-66 that eats up a lot of the money. The bad news is there may be something else. So the available funding being half or so of it, of what was available in round 1 is true. As you heard a number earlier, I think 700 or 800 million is what I heard, but that number is still really in flux right now. But I will point out that last year the $1 billion was 4 or 5 years of projects, and this time it's just for theoretically, it's just for that last out year that we're adding. In reality, of course, there will be some funding that will be available for earlier years. And the changes that have been made since round 1, Ronique mentioned a couple of them. There's not anything really big. I know I had a couple of calls from people saying, oh, I heard they're going to change the listing of eligibility for this year to include planning studies and things like that. And there has been nothing like that. There are some significant tweaks, and I would encourage anyone who's on this call to, if you're considering putting in an application this year, to call in for, there's a webinar next Friday from 10 to 12 that VDOT will be presenting, and it is geared towards all of the external users that may want to come in and put in an application. And that webinar will go through the changes in the Smart Scale portal, which used to be the HB2 application website, and so it'll be a lot of good information for you as far as what small changes have been made. So Josh and Keisha have been very generous and mentioned that DRPT can be very helpful if you let us know ahead of time. Your project manager should know whatever you're thinking about putting in and can offer you some guidance about what's going to work well and what's not. And certainly I'm always available. We do have some money available to provide some support for the planning data and the modeling. So again, the earlier you get in, the more bandwidth we will have to offer in that capacity. And finally, the size of the projects, and this was the aforementioned chicken and the egg issue. The 2 projects that scored really well last year, well, one of them anyway scored, was the highest project that did not get funded last year. It was because, and it was, it's not secret information. It's the VRE Gainesville Haymarket project, and the reason, one of the big reasons it did not get funding is because it's a big project, and I don't think we were able to represent the benefits as well as we would have liked to. And another project that didn't get scored was another VRE type project that was put in by the GW Regional Commission. And again, it was the one Ronique was mentioning in her slide presentation, that it was platforms which, if they are not extended and second platforms are not built, then that's going to affect the capacity of the line. But it was hard for people who were doing the scoring to understand that therefore there is an increase in capacity by doing this infrastructure work. So what we've come up with is that if you put in for the whole project, then in this particular case you would put in for platform extensions plus the purchase of rolling stock, which may be 5 or 6 years down the road. But that way we can say, okay, and this is going to be how many riders there are and the increasing capacity and that sort of thing. So that mindset will help us to try and capture benefits that are, you know, unusually placed for transit as opposed to roads. On highways, you build the road and more people use it or they don't. But with us, we have to set up a lot of things to get to that benefit capture. So I'm sure that sounded very confusing, and again, your project managers can help you with that over here at DRPT if you have any further questions about it. So that's all I had prepared. If anybody has any questions, I'd be more than happy to try and answer them.
Okay. Thank you, Terry, and thanks to all our presenters today. We do have a couple of questions that have come in. One is somebody wanted to know what the website was for SmartScale, and I believe that's vasmartscale.org, vasmartscale.org. And then there's another question, if I can move my chair over here to read it. Is any portion of the $800 million slated for awards in round 2 federal money? Is the issue of whether or not a project gets federalized a matter for negotiation during the scoring process? I'm not sure if I read that correctly, but Terry, I'm going to punt that one over to you and see if you can respond about federal money entering into the leveraging.
Okay, well, I didn't hear it being about leveraging. I heard somebody asking whether any of the HB2 money was going to, in fact, be federal. Is that what you read now, Lisa? Or?
Okay, is any of it federal money? And then the second part of the question is the issue of whether or not a project gets federalized a matter for negotiation during the scoring process. So, yeah.
Right, so, yeah, so what they're asking is, it's a really good question. I know that we were able to take the federal money out. Kim Pryor worked so hard on this trying to identify non-federalized sources because of this concern in round 1, and I have not heard that we're not going to be able to do that this year. So my anticipation is that it will not be federal because of that question. It was causing a lot of consternation about federalizing a project. So that is my understanding, but I'd be happy to look into that as well.
So my misinterpretation to start with, but you could use federal money as your leveraging money, correct?
Yes. Yes, you can bring federal money to the table, yes.
Okay. Any other questions, anybody? I do not see any. Okay, and I hope, and Terry, could you repeat that again about the VDOT webinar? It's going to be next Friday from 10 to 12, and it's going to address some of the changes in the round 2 process.
Yes, and they have not sent out the invitations for the internal folks yet, but I believe that there was an email that went out to the external folks that may be applying for something. So if you did not get one, please let your project manager know, and we'll hook you up.
Okay. All right. Well, there are no further questions. So at this point, that concludes today's webinar, and we want to wish everybody good luck with your SmartScale applications. There are a lot of people out there willing to help you. We want to encourage you to move forward with applications so that there will be plenty of transit improvements. So thank you all again for joining us today, and have a great weekend, and stay cool out there. Goodbye.